Hello again, welcome back. Now, in a moment, we'll examine the issue of endangered species in more detail. But first, here are some other stories to keep an eye on. King Salman of Saudi Arabia has called for the public to pledge loyalty to his son, Mohammed bin Salman, following his surprise appointment as Crown Prince. The 31-year-old replaces his cousin as the next ruler of the kingdom. No explanation's been given for the move. Uber co-founder Travis Kalanick has stepped down as chief executive of the transport service. His resignation comes after a series of protests and legal actions against the company. In a statement, Uber said Kalanick will remain a board member. And dozens of people have been killed in the Central African Republic just days after a peace deal was signed between 13 armed groups. Fighting erupted in the town of Bria as tensions continue to soar between the Muslim Seleka and the Christian anti-Balaka militias. Now, in part one, we looked at efforts to save the Bengal tiger, but there are many, many animals at risk of disappearing. A red list of endangered species compiled by the International Union for the Conservation of Nature features nearly 83,000 animals and plants, with almost a third threatened with extinction. And as Insight's Liam Desborough explains, not all of them garner as much public interest as the Bengal tiger.
Among those said to be critically endangered is the mountain gorilla. There are only around 800 of these left in the wild because of human encroachment on their habitat. Relentless poaching has driven the black rhino to the edge of extinction. Experts say unless more is done to protect them, they could disappear altogether within a few years. The cheetah's population has fallen by 30% in the last 18 years. The species is listed as vulnerable, with less than 7,000 adults left in the wild. And the West African subspecies of the mighty king of the jungle is virtually extinct already, with experts saying they've disappeared completely in some areas. It's thought there are only around 200 lions left in West Africa. One problem is that it's easier for conservation groups to get public sympathy and donations for animals such as apes, big cats and rhinos. But what about the not-so-cute or impressive creatures, which are just as much at risk? The Titicaca water frog is said to resemble a scrotum. It's been nominated as the world's ugliest animal, but pollution is killing them off by the thousands. The proboscis monkey has a face only a mother could love. It's on the endangered list because of the loss of its habitat, with just 7,000 left in the rainforests of Borneo. The Mexican axolotl is on the verge of extinction. There could be as few as 700 left because its freshwater habitats are being destroyed. And the Chinese giant salamander is the largest amphibian in the world. But demand for its flesh is a delicacy, and pollution of its habitat has led to an 80% population decline since the 1950s.
Well, still with me in the studio is David Cowdrey with the International Fund for Animal Welfare. David, you know, so many animals and plants at risk. Is it the case that animals like the beautiful Bengal tiger get more attention and scrotum-shaped frogs get less attention?
It is true in a way because, as you've said in your report, not a lot of people will actually care too much about saving a frog that's not very attractive. Whereas what you want to do is you want to actually look at the whole of the habitat that those species live in. And by having what is called a flagship species, a champion for that habitat, you can use something like a tiger or a mountain gorilla. And it's going to be protecting thousands of species that live within that habitat and help protect it. It can provide investment, it can provide anti-poaching patrols, it can provide protection, community work and employment.
But certainly all the appeals that we see are for things like the gorilla or the tiger or the lion. Do you think people care less about or don't think about other species so much because human activity is so aggressively pushing into those areas?
I think there is a case for that. And again, with the pollution that was mentioned too, you've got the pollution of the habitat, you've got climate change impacts, and especially a lot of the species listed there were amphibians. So when you're actually looking at future with climate change, you're getting a reduction of wetland areas, you're getting increased water temperatures, as well as the pollution that's going on, deforestation. In fact, what we're doing is we're destroying a vast number of species. We're sitting in a modern extinction era. Similar to the dinosaurs, with a number of species which are becoming extinct because of man's behavior.
This is what's so depressing. When you look at this so-called red list, 80,000 species, plants and animals, a warning that a third of them could disappear entirely. I mean, what does this mean for us as a planet?
Well, we have to remember that the very existence of those animals, the very things that they survive on, are the same things that we survive on. So like our oceans, you know, when the oceans are dead, we probably will be. If we chop down the forest, they're our lungs. You have to remember this is one planet that we all share. And the moment we degrade it and take it apart, you know, you get to a point where we're already seeing man's impact on climate change, the threat that that incurs to species and man. Gary, in the earlier part of the report, was talking about, well, if the mangroves go, and the increase in volume and density of the typhoons which are coming are actually going to have a massive impact and loss of human life. We have to think that what we do to the planet, we're doing to ourselves. And so conservation efforts of actually trying to repair that damage, have those charismatic species which people care about, is actually protecting our planet for future generations. So it's by using some more attractive species rather than the less attractive ones
to help
people will
them,
give
help
money
them all.
And really help.
Personally, I think there should be more scrotum-shaped frogs in the world. You obviously care very passionately about this. Is it depressing, given the number of international laws, conventions, like the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, that things aren't improving more quickly? I know there are problems with corruption, with maybe governments not enforcing some of these laws enough, but it must be heartbreaking sometimes to see that the mechanisms are there, but they're just not being used.
There is some heartbreak there at times, but there's also the optimism and there's the hope. And I think that's the wonderful thing about conservationists around the world, that we are full of hope, hope for the future. And yes, we're seeing organized criminal gangs coming in, exploiting things like elephants. They're killing them for trinkets, for ivory, for bracelets, for ornaments to put on your mantelpiece. I mean,
and until that demand goes, this is always going to be a problem. Well,
but there is good news as well. So, for instance, China earlier this year announced an ivory ban. Just absolutely phenomenal. At the end of last year, they came forward and they said they're closing down the ivory markets in China. Those types of initiatives taken by forward-thinking governments like China is making a huge impact on the world. And we've already seen the price of ivory on the black market fall because of that announcement. They've already closed a third of the ivory carving areas within China, and by the end of the year, they will all be closed. So it's about enforcement as well. So you've got enforcement, you've got government will. We talked about training of poachers as well, but also enforcement agencies enforcement
anti-poachers, yes, rangers. Well, let's end on a note of optimism, because conservation efforts have had a good effect in some areas. We've seen some animal populations come back. You're talking about elephants. I mean, they've made a big comeback in North Africa, haven't they?
Well, I mean, elephants are still under huge threats. I mean, you know, we've seen the population decline by a third in 7 years.
So give me some good news. Where are we winning?
Tigers were winning. I think with looking at elephants we're doing now, we've got a new project called Temboma in Kenya, which we're running with the Kenyan Wildlife Service, the Kenyan government. And this is about an intelligence-led operation to actually catch the poachers before they pull the trigger. So in the past, we've always caught them with the ivory. This is a way of doing it. We've also got a new ivory fingerprinting kit. So in the past, ivory is very porous. So with all the poachers, all the middlemen, all the criminal networks touching ivory, we only get the low-level people carrying it. So for the first time, we've now got ivory fingerprinting kit, which can get fingerprints for 30 days. So it's just absolutely phenomenal. So there are really good advancements. Reforestation projects are going on at the moment. We're trying to tackle climate change, although are disappointed with what's happening in America at the moment. We've got to realize we live on one planet. We are all collectively responsible for it, and that's the future of us and endangered species.
Carry on fighting the good fight. David, thank you very much indeed for joining us. David Cowdrey there from the International Fund for Animal Welfare. We end now with our Insight Bite, a little something we feel you should know. And scientists and conservationists from across the world are making it their mission to reverse the rapid decline of animal extinction in the Earth's oceans, home to over 1 million known species. Take the small-toothed sawfish. It's been around for over 50 million years, but its numbers had dwindled as the small creatures became easily trapped and caught up in fishing lines. Now fishermen have been educated in ways to release them back safely into the water, and their numbers have multiplied. Let's hope the same can be said about the thousands of other sea creatures that are at risk from humans. That's it for now. I'm Shuli Ghosh. That was Insight.